Sunday's second panel for the second term at Armadacon, Clare.
So, another weird instrument I thought I'd bring along. I had a lot of thoughts about what I was going to do for this talk. I thought, I know, I could do my pilgrimage talk because it's got props. It involves torture devices, it's great. I thought, no. I could do a talk about what it's like to be a storyteller and how you find historical stories and how you make historical stories accessible to a modern audience. There's a lot of authors here. I know I'll do a comparison of the oral and written tradition. And then I was in hospital last week. And I thought to myself, now, what I need to talk about is the importance of setback, mistakes, restrictions, and the need for risk in any creative endeavour. And I'd like to, with this in mind, I'd like to tell you a story. This is set in 2009 at England's medieval festival in Herstmonceux. And I can tell you a lot about England's medieval festival in Herstmonceux, but we've only got an hour. And this was my first public storytelling event. I've been doing talks to invited audience. I've been brought along to people who were expecting me. But they were quite closed, specific, people who've been self-selected. And I've also been in reenactment for a long time. I started reenactment in the 1990s. I started in very small groups, fire isles, which you've probably not heard of. We basically did private events, and then I moved into public events. And I started off fighting. I would put on the armour, and I'd get out the sword, and I'd go onto the battlefields, and I'd hit people with metal. It was great. And I'd go on to places like Tewkesbury, which is an enormous reenactment event. But it's basically for the reenactors because it's tedious to watch. And the best bit about it, though, is when you go on, there's thousands of people going onto the field. It's all the banners, and there's more people coming on, But once the battle started, but it gives you a sense of how big a medieval battle was, even though it's a fraction of the numbers, but you really have a sense of these people coming on. So I've been doing reenactment some time, and I'd wanted the more performance aspect. And the group I was with, one of the groups, did dance. And they danced to the worst music imaginable. I mean, I was talking to the earliest people about how they want to improve the music they're dancing to. And I listened to their music and I thought, that's not too bad, you should have heard what they were dancing to. I mean, not merely was it reproduction of tape, it was reproduction of tape where they'd lost the first note. It was reproduction of tape where they'd lost the first note, where the instruments weren't even remotely medieval anyway. It was reproduction of tape where they'd lost the first note, where the notes were even something that sounded human or produced by a human, to a really bizarre tune. It was phenomenally poor. And they were going on and they would spend a lot of time having beautiful costumes, talking about whether you should use this cloth or that cloth. And they were doing 17th century dances to something that was covered in piss. And I thought, we could do that. So I formed a group called Stud Splendid, which I've got a very few number of CDs here with me now, to play live music for the dances. And I also got rid of most of the 17th century dances. This was not easy. This sounds like you just turn up and say, we're not doing 17th century dances anymore. It does not happen. So I've been playing music, and we started recording this CD. So I've done a lot of performing. I've been a lot of playing music, a lot of events, but this was the first time I was doing storytelling to an audience who could just turn up. I wouldn't know who they were, it wouldn't be mates. There were friends there, but it wasn't mates. And I was very excited about it, it was a new thing. I went along, I had my stories prepared, they were all medieval or earlier. I practiced them, I went along, and I was terrible. And it's not as if I forgot stories, and it's not as if anyone threw anything or anyone booed, but I was dumb, and there were I didn't have an audience that kind of felt it owed me attention. I had an audience that felt I needed to earn their attention. And that was new. And it was just horrific when you're performing. You're performing, you know it's going badly, and not really performing, you know it's going badly, you've got another show tomorrow. And afterwards, what was worse, there was someone in the audience who I wanted to get some gigs off, and I'm thinking, I wouldn't employ me. And afterwards, I thought, what am I going to do? And this was terrible. I can't continue to do this. And I've got my stories. They're entirely unsuitable for children. They're full of gore, violence, and really bad behaviour. I'm just not thinking, what am I talking about? My stories are full of gore, violence, and really bad behaviour. They're perfect for children. And I thought, what is here is either I now stop and never do it again, or I learn from that awful session. And I go in there, and this time I've got to be more attentive. I've got to work out how to control the children in the audience. I've got to get the audience's attention. I've got to earn the audience's attention, not expect my mates will listen because they're mates. And that evening, it wasn't that evening, but later on that same day, I took part in ground crew, the most dangerous jousting event I've ever been involved with. I mean, I've watched solid lunch jousting, and that has the combination of being stupid, dangerous, and boring. But this particular one was none of those, and I might go on the next day, but it was the most dangerous event I've been in. Talk about risks being taken, and the wrong risks to take, and making the right risks to take. So, having survived this dangerous jazz show, and everybody living, which was actually a surprise, the next day my show turned up. And I suppose it's not going to be a dull show where I'm bored, the audience is bored, and the kids are just running around like crazy. And I was telling the same stories, and I was telling the Battle of Thermopylae, well known for the rather graphic novel. When they say graphic novel, they meant 300. Battle of Thermopylae. And there was a boy in the audience, and he wasn't bored yet, but he was terrified. I was listening. And I thought, I'm not having another dog show. And I suddenly decided, apropos of nothing, no experience, never having tried this before, never even thought of this before, to make him Spartan Army. And he took a moment to realise, it took a moment for me to work out how to communicate him what he needed and him to understand it. But as soon as he realised he was now effectively the star of the show, he flamed. And I got other kids to be the Persians, and we had dead children everywhere. And it was a stalling success, and it's how I now tell that story. I always get, unless the audience really doesn't want to, which is unusual, I always get someone to play the parts. I always have a Spartan, I always have Persians, and I always have a lot of dead children, or dead adults if I run out of children. And I did it because I took a risk. I've never involved a child in my story before. I had never involved anyone, so I'd never tried that before. But I was in a situation where I needed to do something different. I needed to take a risk, because not taking that risk would mean I would have another dull show. And basically, I couldn't. I don't think I could. I don't think if I had not taken that risk, I doubt I'll be storytelling now. And I took a risk, and I could have fallen so flat on my face. It's unbelievable. Not unlike the horses in the gym. And it's made me think that if you are prepared to take risks, if you are prepared to take a setback, look at it in a very harsh way, saying, why was I dreadful? Why was this a boring show? And look at yourself and say, what was wrong and what was right? And take all the lessons and then take all the emotional, I'm terrible, I'm never going to perform again, they're never going to understand me. If you take all that and just throw all that away, and take the lessons, and keep the lessons, and then move on to your next mistake. Because I would like to say that after that I was the best storyteller ever, but obviously it's part of the journey. But it was a vital part of my journey that if I think now, if I hadn't had so early on this utter slap in the face, I think I would have got a bit complacent and wouldn't be so inclined to try and take risks. Do a story, think, is this going to work? It's not going to work. Kind of think that you must take that risk. And you must understand that having taken that risk, it might not work out. And and you can see this in almost all artistic and scientific endeavours. When you look at people who are taking risks, what they're doing, you can take the Beatles as a thing. They took a lot of risks in what they did, and they were kind of on the edge. Some of their risks paid off, some of them didn't, but when they got rid of their mocked up image and did something very different, they lost a lot of audience. They got a lot of audience back. They weren't afraid to take the risk. And it also made me think about boundaries and restrictions, about how important they are in an artistic endeavour. Talk about music groups. There's a band with the White Stripes. Have you heard of them? Two-piece. The drummer got a lot of slack because she wasn't very technical, but what she was is someone who had a good stage presence and a good communication with the guitarist. And together they formed a unit, and she restricted what he could do because he's a bit too talented, and left on his own he'll go off in all kinds of directions. And she restricted him, and although he's done a lot of stuff since, that's Jack White, it's felt that the best work he was done with her when he was being restricted by what he could do by the nature of the band. And I've had a similar experience, is that I was doing a horsey show. This time it was not the most dangerous horsey show ever. It was at Cheltenham and it was a jousting show. It was a tournament show, so it was a mixed, skill of arms, it was jousting, and we had 3 jousting horses, because I might go into that other jousting show. To make a horse good at jousting, you have to have a horse that enjoys jousting. There is no way around this. It has to enjoy what it's doing, and it can't be afraid of it, or not afraid of it. It has to think it's quite fun. And one of the horses we had there was a horse who was over 20 and loved to joust. Absolutely adored it. But the problem was he was well over 20 and would ignore the fact that he was lame to joust. He loved it too much. So the first day we had a show, and it was one of these shows where everything was on the edge. Turned out to be a good show, but kind of everything was almost going wrong. Like when one horse ran the wrong side of something holding things for the skill arm and broke it, and it was all just, you feel this show's on a knife edge, but nothing's actually going wrong, but we're safe. It's just the feeling that something is, we're just waiting for it. And that evening, we're testing the horses, and this 20-year-old jouster, he was like, he would have jousted the next day. He loved it. He would have jousted lame. And that's when you go, we are not jousting a horse if he's lame, even though he would do it. And you're thinking, we can't do it. We're not treating horses like that. We're not here to abuse horses. We care about horses as well. So we think, well, we can't do a 2-horse joust. It doesn't work. So we have to overnight redesign the show, as well as repairing the bits of kit that have been broken. We have to work out how we're going to make a 2-horse joust within the context of it. And we completely redesigned the show. Within the restriction, what we had 2-horse jousts, had a 2-horse melee, had to make it so the fighters fought in 2 groups rather than 3 groups. And we did this new tournament show the next day. And what we did is we would divide the audience and say, you are cheering for them. We didn't give the audience choices, because the audience doesn't care. They want to turn up and be entertained. And you say, that person there, you care if you win or lose. They said, I didn't care before, but I do now. And turning the audience into two really created a good tribal feeling. And moving it so it was divided into two, the way you had to arrange the show, created this buzz that was going on. And this show is steel jousting. So people aren't wearing knitted armour, they're wearing steel armour, so it's a contact sport. The lances have balsa wood tips. So if you get a good hit, the balsa wood will shatter. If you get a particularly good hit, you will hit the thing and they get. But you need to have good armour because there's bits of flying balsa wood, and there has been an instance in this country where someone was killed by balsa wood going in their helmet, and there's a lot to be said about why that happened and why that could have been avoided. But it just shows you that small slivers of balsa wood are very dangerous. That's why people are wearing very proper helmets. We spend a lot of time being safe while still entertaining an audience. And so there's points, we don't know who's going to win. We haven't planned it. Whoever's fights well, whoever does it, and they're given points. And if there's a draw, we never make people go and do one more fight, one more joust, or one more something, because that's when accidents happen. Because everyone's kind of, you go back in. So what we tended to do was get the audience to cheer, decide who wins. Very many times. This particular time, there was a draw, and normally you kind of, well, draw, I can make them cheer. So I was doing the commentary, and I turned to the part of the audience closest to me, and there was a good buzz going. There was thousands of people, but there was a lot of people in this area. They were quite tightly, because of other restrictions about where the joust could happen, because you don't have enough space. You don't have enough space for us, you don't have enough space for the horses. They'd had to move the audience into this more restricted space. So the audience was a lot closer together than they normally were. Not packed, but close. So you now had a compact audience set into two who had a good show. And I said, go and cheer for them. And I did a normal, and I was expecting it, yay! And this cheer erupted. And I have not heard a cheer like it outside a sports arena or a concert, a big concert. And I thought, what's going on? That wasn't the right time, because it just kept on going. I could not believe the noise they were making. I've never had cheering at any show I've done, any show I've seen anybody else do of this nature. And eventually they stopped. I turned to them and said, we've got to beat that. And then we went crazy as well. There were dogs barking, people like children. And there was this enormous, again, huge cheers. Because they were so good, I gave them a draw, because after that, no side could lose. But I'm convinced that it was such a success is because we've changed the format, because we have to change the format, because the audience, lots of things about how restricting the audience in small places. So it's adapting things and having boundaries on what you're doing can often have really, really good effects on what you get up to. And how, if you're doing any artistic endeavour, when you have a setback, when you make a mistake, when you have restrictions placed on you, the response has not got to be, it's got to be, well, I've got to learn from that setback, I've got to embrace, work out why that mistake happened, and I've got to embrace the restrictions. Another example of that, which always sticks in my mind, is Dad's Army. Has anyone seen the original credit sequence? It's of the Nazi armies marching. There's swastikas. It's almost a Lenny it's almost Triumph of the World. Utterly dramatic. And the idea was that this is the machine that these silly men are fighting. And they said, but this was in the 1960s, too soon. And Dad's Army was having a lot of difficulty getting happening. And the creators were saying, if it's not like this, we're not doing it. And the producers were saying, look, we can get everything else through, it's important. It's just a title sequence. title sequence as you want it, it's going to kill the show because they're going to put it in a bad slot. Don't do that. Do something better. And they did something better. And that's what I think, look, if someone says to you, don't do that, then you know, I've just got to do something better. This is kind of an artistic endeavour, is about you not being given the full artistic freedom, because if you've got too much freedom, like me, then what am I going to talk about? What you need is this. So you've got full artistic freedom here, and you've got no artistic freedom here. Obviously you can't work there either. And you've got to find the space in between, where there's mistakes, restrictions, where you're trying to earn a living. And you've got to embrace that and make the restrictions basically things that really work for you. Now this one, does anyone have an opinion? I thought, because we have a few artistic people here. They have an opinion on that, about how they've experienced that at all. Otherwise I can wish about that. Oh yes.
I think the experience I've had is I've got into media work over the past few years. I used to write, and I was always very confident with my audience in writing. But with media work, I was completely a novice. And I mean, my mum had to sit me down and show me how to knit at the age of 38 or something. It would be a bit ridiculous, but I really loved it. It took off so much so, and but I find you have to start a new thing. If you continue with the old thing, the mistakes in the project just multiply. But when you've got a fresh piece of wool or a fresh cross-stitch canvas, you almost instinctively learn from mistakes that you made last time. I've been doing 2 major projects in cross-stitch. I've got a massive Christmas theme, an Inuit and an Inuit and a reindeer from Siberia from a Russian Christmas card, and I spent all summer on it. And towards the end of the summer, I realised that it was too big to focus on. There was too much of the just infill, and I was getting bored. And there was too much sort of dither on some of the background, and it was so difficult to stare at a sort of very tightly drawn pattern and keep accurate to the picture, because if you get one stitch in the wrong place, you can have one stitch off the other side, and it all blows up in your face. So I started a new project, and I can go back to my reindeer probably for next Christmas. But then with the new picture, I started very focused in the middle. I got all the threads I needed together at the start, rather than trying to find that one last colour later on, and it worked. It's working so much better.
Yeah. And
that's the takeaway. You've got to be able to know when to discard something as well as when to...
Despite the fact you've got vast amounts of work in it.
Yes, exactly. But it's always going to be there. You can always look at, you can always untangle it.
You might find it really untangling, but half of it.
Yes, but you can always go back to it if you really want to finish it.
Yeah.
But it really does help to move on.
Yeah. And I think the idea is that sometimes you want to hang on to something. I've put this much work into it, but you're basically... It's on dodgy foundations, and you've got a, a number of times you've got to kind of, well, this is not going anywhere, you've got to move on, despite the fact you've invested a lot of time and money in something, but it doesn't make it any better. But all you're doing is putting more time and money into that thing, and it is letting go of your mistakes, and realising that that mistake is not recoverable from, moving on.
The thing about total artistic freedom and no artistic freedom, I tend to find if I don't have some constraints, I freeze because of option overload. It's too open and you can't make any decisions.
That's a lot of things I say about modern music, why modern music has... You have a big debate about why modern music is always rubbish, but there is a issue that a lot of people are doing is they're saying we have too much choice. So people are actually going back to things which restrict what they can do deliberately. For instance, go back to the White Stripes and Jack White, he would deliberately get guitars that were hard to play. He would deliberately restrict things to make him work for it. And they're also doing so things, so rather than having everything you can want to do on this MIDI, they said, well, I'm going to use this Red 5 app, which makes you sound like the Beatles. Or I'm going to do this, which restricts how many, so I've got to work around it. And so it is genuinely a problem that music makers are having now, is they have too much choice. They don't know what to do with it. So they're putting restrictions in for themselves to find creative avenues.
I mean, I can use the example of improv, we had that here last night. It's all about restrictions, because okay, two people can do a scene. And then again, to use an example from last night, you're quite happily along having some dialogue, and then some idiot demands that you use a line from your pocket. No idea what it is. But it's that restriction that makes it funny, and then takes you in a different direction. Otherwise, you'd probably just witter on.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's very easy to witter on. And yes, it's how are you going to? Because again, it's like jazz improvisation is actually improvisation with very strict rules. There's a lot of creative activity going, but they have. This is what you're improvising around. They're not just saying, "Oh, we'll sit down and do stuff." They have rules about which they're doing it, and it's again. I think artistic endeavour flourishes on restrictions. I'll use Star Wars as a big example of this. First Star Wars, George Lucas was covered in restrictions, and the more it went on, the fewer restrictions he had, and you can tell.
I think some of the, I like Harry Potter, I like J.K. Rowling's book, but some of the later books, an example of where some people become too big to edit.
Yeah.
So some of the earlier ones are more finely tuned. And I've read it in, I think it was the Goblet of Fire one, where there's actually the same scene in there twice, in a slightly different way, because they just thought, oh great, J.K. Rowling, let's get it out and sell it as soon as possible, rather than actually taking a critical view of it and making it better.
Heinlein, I think, is another really good
What, sorry?
Heinlein.
Okay.
Early books, Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Starship Trooper, oh, and Razor Sharp, you could cut yourself on the pages of those. Stranger in a Strange Land, or a bit soggy around the middle. What was the other one?
Time Enough for Love.
Yeah, that was a bad one.
Ian.
One publisher has got hold of things like the unedited Heinlein, ones he submitted before the editor said, no, change that ending. And dear God, I thought Volcano of Mars was betrayed at the end when I read the unedited. And yeah, thanks to that editor.
They need to go further though, isn't it? Yeah, it is that because that you're giving. That's why I suspect that the Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, I suspect will end badly because he's now getting more and more freedom to do what he likes, and at the start.
Do you think he will ever write the last book?
He's only 10 years late. Come on.
Well, it's
Don't be so patient.
yeah, but I suspect he's going to do it because there's a lot of anticipation and he doesn't need the money now. Yeah, I mean, I think it is that you get these people, and it is. You could do it. Will Smith, he's when he did the vanity project for his son, is that everyone's just saying, oh, you're so wonderful, we're not going to give you any restrictions, not realising that very, very few artists flourish without restriction because they start to think, oh, and what they do is anything, not something good. And it's quite interesting that Beethoven wrote quite magnificent music on death. That restriction didn't seem to hold him back. He had a bit of a difficult life. We love artists who suffer. We really love a good suffering artist. But so the more you think about it, the more thing. So when you get a setback in an artistic endeavour, I'm thinking about writers particularly. The setback is that you've got to kind of learn from go on. But it's also the idea of how many setbacks before you realise you're going down a blind avenue. That then becomes a problem. Because you can't let a setback stop you. But we go on, I don't know, I'm dragging down, and some people say, please stop spending all your money on this terrible idea. And they've got such blind faith in themselves that you realise they are going to bankrupt themselves, they're going to lose their house over a really bad business proposition. And so how do you, so again, this idea, bracing your setbacks, but I think that's the analysis of your setbacks. When you look at them, you've got to be emotionally attached to realise, oh, that was just a disaster and I need to completely have a new direction, or this is just, I can still go on, this is a setback in that direction. And that comes down to being honest with yourself. And it's criticism. How do you take criticism?
Also, knowing when to step outside the boundaries. I was thinking of Terry Pratchett, who said that if he'd done what he'd found as a publisher wanted, he could continue writing Winthrop novels, and he'd have gone mad before them. But he was the one who said, no, I'm going to step outside that particular line, and how the whole thing developed.
Yes.
Into something much bigger and wider, and also books outside of that particular genre.
Yes, I think it is. But also, it's criticism. When people have come up to me and given me proper constructive criticism, your initial response is, "But I'm wonderful. Everything I do is perfect." And I let myself have that moment, because I know a moment later I will have, oh, blinking hell, they're right. And if you hang on to the, oh, I'm perfect, more than that moment, because if you're exposing yourself by doing an artistic endeavour, you have to have faith in yourself. So when someone criticises, you're instantly going to give up, but you have to give it up. You have to give it up for that moment later to listen to what that criticism is. And if you don't do that, it's another artistic black art.
I think you talk about having faith in yourself, but I think you also have to have a very clear idea about what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And because that might not be just a simple thing, when you get that criticism, that's when you step back.
Yeah.
For example, I'm working on my second book of poems, and I got some criticism over it, and some was great. Some of it, the poems are better because of it.
Yeah.
But there were some comments, and I thought, no, that is not what the poem is about.
Yeah.
And I had to stop and think. So it would make a poem more that they might have example, but it's not what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. You've got to be open to that idea that you've got to be able to analyse what they say. If someone's just hurling abuse at you, that's not what I'm talking about. You've got to say, what are they saying? Do I agree with what they're saying? If I did what they're saying, would that be a direction I wanted to go? Or is it they're right, but that's not the direction I want to go? So how can I understand what they're saying, but not follow that path? But it's all about managing. It's about killing your babies. They all talk about killing your children. You've got to really like it. You've got your needlework that's taken you 3 months to say, look, oh, this is rubbish. But learn from it, and but still hang on to self-belief to go on to the next thing, and not just say, oh, they're right. I've got a great story about the man, his son and a donkey, about how listening to other people blindly doesn't get you very far. And it is not listening to people won't work. Listening blindly to people doesn't work. And again, it's finding this path. That's why there's no proper way of doing it. You've got to work out, and sometimes you might work out that yourself is where you're saying, yes, I want to do this, and you're thinking, actually, is that good? What I want to achieve, is that the thing I should be achieving? Do I need to completely evaluate my aims? And that's the harshest thing I suppose all I think it is that because when they're saying you should do something else, you're saying, but I don't want to do that, and then you look at it and think, maybe I should. But it's finding your way. And I think authors must have this. When you write a book, it doesn't sell. I've had this when I developed a story and nobody loved it. It's a great story. I developed this story which was based on stone tapes by Nigel Neal. And it's the idea that people, when they walked over a rock, a path, that rock would take a slight essence of the person who walked over it. And if an army walked over a rock, more of that essence of that army would stay in that rock. And so the stones know the stories it to a Halloween story, told it to kids, didn't touch it. Completely failed. So much so that I can't even work out how to make it. And it was an idea that I loved. And you got to kind of, oh well. And when it failed a couple of times, I like it.
Yeah. So tell us it.
Yeah, but it's a good story, but it didn't work from what I was using it for. And I was at this particular event where I'm in this beautiful handmade round house, got a fire, and the children need to tell the story, have a fun garden. And it wasn't working, and I told it twice, and it didn't work twice. I thought, okay, I prepared 2 stories, can't use one of them. Fortunately, you always have a few extra stories. Because hardest storytelling experience I've had was same place, Halloween. I've had an 8 age limit on the door. They said they would do it. So I prepared 2 stories. One was the Kelpie, which involves the death of one child and the maiming of another. The child is drowned. Another story which involves someone hanging themselves. These were dark stories, but they were pitched over 8. And first group came in, they were just the right age. Told the story of the Kelpie. And after the story finished, everyone laughed. And it's that laugh you get when you frighten someone, but they know it's over. It means you've got it just right. They didn't like it. It was a scary story, but it was only a story, and now you've finished. And they came to be scared. And they went out. I was like, yeah. So came in, children slightly younger, told the other story. And after I told the story, there was this slightly hurt silence. Not meditating, but you felt it was a bit harsh on the environment. It wasn't, they weren't really upset, but it was, that was a bit more than I was expecting. And they went out, and the next group came in, and the children were younger again, and I thought, I cannot use either of my stories in this group. I spent a lot of time on these stories, and I thought, and people said, why didn't you tell them they had an age limit on the door? And you can't tell inappropriate stories, even though you have warned people, you still have a responsibility. And I was looking at it, I don't know what to do. So I had no break, there's no break, there's no break between stories. And I think, while working out what to do, I told the boy who cried wolf, which is a story that you can dig up. And someone came up and said, thank you for toning down the story. And I think I was still trying to work out how to adapt these stories so I could tell them. The next audience came in, there's still these young children, and someone requested a story that I'd told the previous year. And that gave me a breathing. I was able to tell it because it's a really good story that involves a jump scare. But you can't tell it every year. And in that time, I've had the boy who cried wolf and this other story I knew, I'd worked out how to tone down the Kelpie story. I removed one of the deaths, and the child was only lesser named. So it was still a nasty story, but it didn't have drowning of children in it. And I was then able to bring in other stories, but I had to, with no time to go away and reflect, change the story I was telling while still telling stories. And I have to say, that's one of my best storytelling evenings. Because I told some great stories, and I realised I couldn't tell them, and I told some more great stories, and everybody had a good time, and I was being challenged the entire night. And it was really, really good night for me, because I was in serious boundaries. What do you mean they're too young? And I stepped up to it. Could easily have said, I'm sorry, your family, I know you've got a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, and a 9-year-old, but the 2 young ones have got to go. That's just not going to happen. So it's again, bracing the restrictions, stepping up to it, and when they come to you, don't collapse, push through it. I really enjoyed that.
So what do you think of
parents that take their 2-year-old and their 4-year-old and their 9-year-old to a parental advisory movie because they're allowed to, and then to take the screaming children out.
They have to go home with that child after. Yeah, I mean, the movie's not going to change what it's doing.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
But if that child's frightened, they will have a screaming child overnight. If they're taking somebody else's children to it, that's another matter. So have you ever had any thoughts about restrictions? I'll tell you the story about the most dangerous jousting show I've been to.
Yeah.
Come on. All right. Okay, so this one. This is at England's Medieval Festival. A bit cheesy, but I have to say I have enjoyed shows at Hurst and Sow. But this show, the way the format of Hurst and Sow is they have this skill at arms event where anyone can enter, and you do get rings. You go and you kind of swords on a cabbage, and then if you're really good, you get mace, and you get a cabbage, and you get constable. I mean, this is what you normally do with skill arms. Normally, you dig it up and you make it as quite an entertaining show. At Hurst and Sow, they decided to turn it into a competition to make it really boring. Because people keep going along, doing something again. But the thing about it is that the people in that show often hire horses who do skill arms for the show. And the people who hire the horses for the skill arms are also the people who are hiring horses to the joust. And the people who are hiring horses for the skill arms will only take a horse that they're comfortable with to do the skill arms. So they take all the horses that will do skill arms, all the confident horses, the horses that don't mind posts, the horses that don't mind you having something on your thing that rattles something. All the horses suitable for jousting. And it left a group of horses that were scared of people in armour on top of them. And the bizarre thing is that the people who were riding had actually ridden these horses the week before the crash, and there'd been incidents. A guy lost his front tooth, he had a fall which I believe caused him a lot of difficulties later in life. But when you ride a horse, if you get on a horse, you've got to accept there's a high chance you'll go off that horse in an unexpected way. I mean, I've been thrown from horses at least 3 times, and one of those times that horse was trampled me, which I felt was unnecessary, uncalled for. And the best thing about it is the person around the horse looked at she got horse bandages and some wet towels and started wrapping me up in horse bandages. And I think she would have given me horse medicine if she could have. I think horse doctored it. And my whole...
She didn't shoot you.
Yeah. I was still walking. And my whole arm went this black colour I've only ever seen in movies from dead people. So yes, falling off a horse doesn't mean it's dangerous. Falling off a horse means you've got on a horse. And anyone who gets on a horse who doesn't expect to get off unexpectedly shouldn't have got on that horse. So that wasn't really the problem. And so it wasn't the riders that they were good, but they knew these horses were a bit mad. And I was saying to them, and I saw them practicing, I said, these horses are a bit mad. And they said, yeah, they're a bit mad. Why are you riding these bit mad horses? And they got into the show must go on. We're going to do the joust on crazy horses because it's fun. And I'm thinking, and they are good riders, and the problem is that it starts to get other people going on. Not all the horses were crazy, just enough of them. There were 2 particular ones. And I ground crewed. I wasn't there with them, but I was friends with them, and they needed ground crew. So I was there, and it took us over 5 minutes to get one of the knights onto a horse. That's a bad sign. Because all this Hollywood thing of these jousts, you put them on like that. What you do is when you normally get a knight on, if you've got well-fitting armour, you just step on it. Someone holds the horse, you help them on because if your armour is good, it should not impede your movement. It just makes you a little bit stiff. It's really good. It doesn't even move. And it's close fitting, and you can fall off the horse and it won't hurt you. And I think the reason this guy had an incident was that his armour didn't fit him as well as it should have done. And so normally what you do is knight stands on the block, bring the horse, you hold the horse's head, someone holds the saddle, someone helps the knight get his leg over the horse, and the job's done. this horse didn't even want to go near the block, because there was a man in armour on it, and then you're trying to hold a horse next to a block, and horses are stronger than you. and you don't want to be trampled. I've been trampled before, it's less fun than you think. And the horse, so you have to keep going on. In the end, we managed to get all the knights mounted, and I was thinking, they are mad. Because I would not have done that. And they went in, and the joust went ahead, and jousting, this is balsa wood jousting, so you've got the balsa wood great. It's contact sport, but to make it do, horses have to run towards each other straight. Horses don't like that. They're herd animals, they want to run with horses, not against them. So needless to say, these horses didn't want to do that. So it was a really weird show where you always felt something was not going right. It wasn't a good show because it was just there was this sense of danger. I think the audience got the touch of because it was dangerous. And the incident that I remember above all is that one of my friends was a very good rider. He'd had a bad run, got ready, did his lance, did the laissez-aller, which is pull the lance up, and then you lower the lance to run. He lowered the lance to run, and the horse ran away from the tilt rail, like that. So there's the tilt rail, just who did that. How did that happen? And the arena is a large grass arena, and all that can protect the audience, you've got 2 rope barriers, and they're a metre apart, and the idea is you have everybody is outside the furthest one, and this works. And there were straw bales around the edge, and all the audience was very good. They had their feet outside the second barrier, and this horse was running the edge, and he wasn't slowing down. And I was watching him thinking, he's lost control. And that horse was not Armadacon. That's actually heading towards me, actually. And I was thinking, well, I'm not getting rid of the horse. And by my right, so the rope's here, the second rope's there, and there's a woman sitting on a hay bale there, and the horse is running straight on. And I'm thinking, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And it's coming closer, it's coming closer, it's coming closer. And just at the last minute, the horse goes, all 4 feet, and falls backwards on the hay bale. She probably thought that was an incredible stunt run. What it was that far off a nasty incident. He just managed to pull the horse back, and the horse had just decided that jumping 2 rows and hitting people was probably less desirable than stopping. But I don't think it was first, because he had a nasty metal thing on his back he didn't like. And that was it. He retired. He did not run again, because he knew how close it was. And it was one of those things, and it wasn't the only incident, that was the worst. And it was, when that's taking risks you should not have taken, because the show had to go on. And I set up for that. I can't know what happened, but I think they did not have, the craziest horses were retired. But that's, that taking risks is not always the right answer. Well, I think that's about my time. I have blathered mindlessly, and the man who's coming to throw me off with a crook is coming. Any last comments, thoughts, questions? Before I finish?
Can we have a bit more music?
Huh?
Can we have a bit more music?
Well, let's see if this is playing. Well, this is a double pipe, because it's 2 pipes.
Don't get too technical.
Yeah, I'm not getting technical here. They're a 4th apart, and when this pipe was made in southern France, and if it's even remotely damp or cold, it says, "I'm sorry, I was made in southern France." I'm not playing. Let's see if it will play for you. not, but I think it needs to realise it's in England. And another tune I do is actually the command. But by the end it doesn't sound like that. So I think that's me. Yes, I did. Yes, pretty much on time. So any more questions? Thank you very much. I've had a lovely time here. I have changed very much what I was going to do, but again, you got to go with the flow. Don't hang on to what you thought you were doing. Learn from mistakes, embrace restrictions, and enjoy positive feedback, which I have to say I have had such lovely, lovely comments from last night. I have to say I'm so pleased. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And no critical stuff, actually. I'm coming again. It was so lovely.
So, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Clare.